the Italian contingent to be here in full strength to support me. So when Pauline asked me to give this talk, the idea was to introduce a bit what I do. And so this is why we decided to leave this paper, although the paper now is has been accepted in CAR to present this paper, because the paper, I use the paper to actually tell you what I do and what I will possibly do in the future. Actually, most of the presentation will not be on the paper. I gave the same talk 2 weeks ago in Glasgow. I talked for an hour, and then I realized that after an hour I still hadn't started to talk about the paper. So I will talk more about what I do, and then I'll also use the paper as an excuse for that. The paper is something that I've done with Cristiano Busco, who is now at NYU Galway. Has been going around quite a lot, like me. The paper has a long history. It was originally written for an organization theory journal, and we were quite unlucky because we got one positive review, one occasion review, but we got rejection anyhow. And that, let's say, made us think, okay, possibly it's better to stay in a familiar field, that of accounting. So, in a sense, the presentation reflects that the paper has a long history. So, in the presentation, there are many more things that actually the paper now does. If you read the paper, hopefully now it's much more linear and clearer than the various things we will be saying during the presentation. So, what are the research questions or issues that we want to address? We wanted to address in this paper. As I said, some of these now have gone, and some of these have remained. The first one, I think that the original impetus for writing this paper came out of my original, my initial stuff on ERP systems. When I did my postdoc in Manchester, I was studying the interface between management controls and ERP systems, and the various cases that I was exposed to, ERPs always failed and created problems. They always costed a lot to implement, but still people were implementing them. So the question is, how is that management and accounting techniques like Six Sigma, Balanced Scorecard, ABM, ERPs, whatever, you name it, are widely adopted despite the cost and problems that their implementation entails? So what is that makes people convinced that these things will eventually work, while in fact they never do? So that was one of the things. The second thing was more related to the Balanced Scorecard, in fact, and it relates to this. How is that they differ so much, but also the ERPs to some extent, how is that they differ so much in terms of features and uses across organizations, and we still refer to them as if they were the same thing? So you may find an ERP implementation implemented in even the same version of SAP, for instance, implemented in two different organizations, and they generate completely different effects. Their ABAP code is coded in a completely different way. And still people refer to it as if it was the same SAP system. How is it they manage to engage practitioners who are driven by different and sometimes opposite agendas? So these things get implemented in organizations where, like in every organizations, including this school, people have different agendas. And so how is that these things manage to create some kind of, or to mobilize some kind of action that make people go into the same direction? So how is that these big successful management techniques manage to engage practitioners who are driven by different and sometimes opposite agendas and interests? And the other thing is, what makes them successful? So once they are implemented, how is that these things that do create problems are used for many different purposes, still are there and exist within organizations? In a sense, the word success is a very interesting word. If we look at the etymology of the word success, I can ask the Italians here. What is the etymology of the word success? You know.
Who's next?
The etymology of the word success comes from succedere, that means to happen. So these things are successful not because they have very specific features and they last because of those features, but because they are kept used within organizations for reasons that are always changing and different. So these were the questions that we wanted to address with this project. Of course, then the paper was purified and became a bit more linear. And there have been in the literature a couple of answers. Of course, from an economic and functionalist point of view, they are used because they are useful. They help companies to increase profits. They add values. The benefits are greater than the cost. Or from an institutional perspective, moving from, let's say, functionalism to social constructivism, because they are fads, fashions, they are used because the others use it. I mean, there are some firms who are implementing ERP systems, their share price goes up. If we don't do it, our share price will go down. And so we do it not because there is necessarily an immediate benefit, but because there is some kind of isomorphic pressure. These answers may well be correct, but we wanted to do something different. So we wanted to focus on the practice in itself, a keynote in the network of relationship that underpins decisions for adoption, rather than focusing either on the adopters or on the contextual variables. So we want to explain why the Balanced Scorecard is used, not because people decide to use it, not because the context forces us to use it, but because the practice in itself has got some agency. So agency is not only in people's mind, but it is in the thing in itself. Okay. And for those who do know, or for explaining this better, I can give you an example. There is a nice series of examples that Bruno Latour, is a sociologist of science, makes in, I think it's in Pandora's Soul, and he says, have you ever tried zapping or changing channels without a remote control? Have you ever tried to put a nail on the wall without a hammer? You would not even think of doing these things if you do not have the technology, if you do not have the object. Because if you have to change channel, if you don't have a remote control, you have to, go up, boom, and change the channel. Then you sit down, oh, I don't like this thing, and you go there, and change again. Then you sit down again. You can do this forever, for 1,000 channels, right? But you would stop after 10. And so your willingness, your agency, your desire of watching a program is not in your mind, but it's actually in between your mind and the technology that you're using for making the decision. Same thing for the hammer. Okay. So here we are trying to address this issue. So how is that the object has got some action? And we will come back to the definition of object in a while. Then this links to some debates that have been going in the literature and some of the issues that I was interested in. Now, there is a paper by Miller and Napier in 1993 who says, how is it there is no essence to accounting? I mean, they say accounting is so many things that in the end it doesn't have any essence. And this links back to what Anthony Hopwood said in a paper in 1993 and then in the Archaeology of Accounting Knowledge in 1987. We look at accounting and we think that it is about measuring profit. Okay, this is what accounting is. Then another one looks at accounting and he or she thinks that it is actually about controlling the workforce, so disciplining the workforce. Then you look at accounting, someone else looks at accounting and it sees that it is about religion. Then someone else looks at accounting and sees that it is about something else. So he ends up saying that accounting has the tendency to become what it was not. So it is a practice that is always evolving. And this is why Miller and O'Leary end up saying that accounting doesn't have any essence. And the essence of accounting, if any, needs to be looked in the practice that it mobilizes, or in the context in which it is inserted. I've tried to look at this in a paper, in particular in a paper on the Jesuits, where I reflected on the nature of accounting practices, and said, and basically when I wrote that paper, the paper was written in a way that the case could have been explained from an economic point of view, from an institutionalist point of view, from a Marxist point of view, from a religious point of view. It could be read in many different cases, because accounting doesn't have any particular essence. I ended up showing a case where accounting was used in a religious organization, but I didn't want to say that the nature of accounting is religious. I wanted to say that accounting is a multifaceted object. It doesn't have any essence. So how is that these strange objects, this is what Lloyd Singleton, how Lloyd Singleton described these objects, become adopted? Is accounting, it doesn't have any essence. If it is so multifaceted, if its ontology is so multiple, how is that people decide to adopt it? So do I adopt it for economic reasons, for the economic part, for the religious part, for which part? So how is this thing that is so difficult to grasp actually become so successful? And Lloyd and Singleton, but also Anne-Marie Moll, they have beautiful examples. GP, look at my eye. Okay, yeah? Is this really red or pale?
It's red.
It's red, but is it really red?
Pale red.
Look at your, show yours. Do this. Well, that is much more red than mine, right?
I can't.
You can't, but they can. Okay. So there is this paper about diseases, things like liver diseases or anemia. These things are quite difficult to define, although we think that diseases are very easy to define. They are defined very easily. In fact, they are not. So, for instance, anemia is a very difficult disease to define, to identify, because you can identify anemia with symptoms. If you look at my eye, I'm quite pale. I'm anemic. Okay. Then I do a blood test, and I result as an anemic, because my blood count is low. So symptoms, statistics, I'm anemic. Then other symptoms, I should be tired, but I'm not particularly tired. So I do not fit in that definition of anemia, because I'm a carrier of a disease which is called thalassemia. And therefore I'm perfectly okay, despite the fact that I look anemic. Statistically I am anemic, but I'm not anemic because I'm used to this low level of blood cells. Another example that happened to us was, just to give you an idea, that even the most simple and scientific things are not that easy to define. Being pregnant or not pregnant. I remember when I was in Oxford and my wife calls me and says, "Oh, Paolo," I was in Israel at that time, "Paolo, you have to come back because I'm not sure whether I'm pregnant or not." "What do you mean?" "I'm in the hospital and they do not know whether I'm pregnant or not. I may have a cancer, I may be pregnant, or I may have an abortion in place, a miscarriage in place. But they do not know. Because the way in which you define pregnancy is either through a scan, or statistically, measuring the organs, or, I can't remember what the third one was, but for each of those, it was not clear that my wife was having a miscarriage or being still pregnant. So even the most obvious things, like being pregnant, are not that easy to be defined. They are objects which are strange. The Balanced Scorecard is an object that is strange. Accounting is an object that is strange. It's difficult to define. Okay? And so how is that these things that are difficult to be defined become adopted. So what are we adopting if we do not know what this thing is? What does it mean for a management accounting practice to succeed? So if you are, if you go down the functionalist route, you would say you are successful because you're improving KPIs. You are successful because, through this accounting system, I can improve myself. Or you are successful because through this accounting system, I can screw the workforce. But if it is not clear what accounting is, it is not also clear what success is. So if the criteria for success are so difficult, the only criterion for success that we can define is going back to the root of the word success, which means one thing is successful if people keep using it, but they use it for tons of different reasons, for tons of different rationales, for tons of different aims. And this is something that I've done in the paper on accounting books, but also in this present paper, and also another paper on rationality. In particular, the paper on books was about how do these things, how these strange objects engage the audience and are kept and are used. In that paper, I looked at the visual power of accounting. I was looking at the success and diffusion of accounting text and books, not because of the content of accounting, but because of the shape of the book, of the organization of the book, of the visual layout of the page. So how do these things actually manage to attract the attention of the user? I remember one of the referees for that paper was very likely Adrian Jones, who is an historian of the book, and in one of his books he said, a book is a book if it is read. If it is not read, it's a piece of furniture. So it becomes something else. So how is that accounting is used? So what makes accounting practical? What makes accounting practiced? Because otherwise it becomes something else. Berlusconi, I'm sure Berlusconi will come back in this presentation again later on. But I'm pretty sure that he has tons of books, but he possibly bought them by meter, right? So how is that accounting remains accounting? And in that paper on the accounting books, where I wanted to see how the material object started to engage the audience, I came across this idea of rhetorical machines. In particular, there is one that is very conducive to the aims of this paper. What are rhetorical machines? That paper is an historical paper. It's a paper about accounting books published in the 16th and 17th century. And so I came across rhetorical machines, like the wheel. So let's assume that, like now, I have to give a talk, okay? And so I have to remember what to say in that talk. What techniques can I use to remember my speech? There were tons of techniques, tons of machines used for remembering these speeches. One of which was the wheel. So let's assume that I have to give a talk about love, okay? So what do if I'm an orator? I take a piece of paper, a round piece of paper, and I write love on it, okay? Then I do an inventory of cards, and I start numbering them, okay? From 1 to n. And I start writing what I think love is about. So love could be about affect, passion, peace, respect, care, devotion, desire, loyalty. If you were Berlusconi, it would be about boonga boom. Okay, so you put what you think love is. And then you start to place these cards around the center. So I think that for the audience that I have, love is about affect, passion, peace, and respect. What does this displacement of cards do? It does two things. The first is to define love. Now love is about these four things, and it is not about something else. Okay? The second thing that it does is to help me to remember the order of the speech. I know that when I have to confront the audience, I start from talking about affect, then passion, then peace, and then respect. Then my talk ends, and I start getting the questions from the audience. Okay, and that question doesn't fit. I mean, there is no answer. I cannot answer that question with these 4 cards. So, as a good orator, what do I have to do? What I have to do is to find an answer that can convince that person, but also keep the rest of the audience convinced. So what I do, I go back to my inventory of cards and search for a card that convinces this person, but also keeps the rest of the audience convinced. In doing this, what am I doing? I'm changing the nature of love. Love is no longer about affect, passion, peace, and respect. It is about desire, passion, peace, and respect. So people think that they are talking about the same thing, but the thing has changed its nature and meaning. Okay? So this is an interesting thing, because it is at the core of accounting. Because rhetoric is organized in 3 parts. The first part is called dell'inventario, inventio. Okay? So what you do in the first part of rhetoric, when you have to organize a speech, you do an inventory of the themes that you have to talk about. So you do an inventory. And the first canon of rhetoric is called inventio. Inventio originated 2 things: inventory in accounting and invention as innovation. Okay? The second canon of rhetoric is called ordinatio e dispositio. So you order the cards and you dispose them around your object to give meaning to one thing. Now you may think, okay, there is a coincidence between accounting and rhetoric with the first canon, but not with the second. If you look at old accounting textbooks, they were all organized in 3 parts. The first part, dell'inventario, about the inventory. The second part, specifically in a book by a Jesuit in 1636, who is the guy who invented the accruals, so not the last, not one amongst many, it's the guy who invented the accruals. Rhetorical Flori. The second part is called dell'ordinazione e disposizione dei conti, of the ordination and disposition of the accounts. The third part was about the style that you have to choose when you communicate the results. What is the third canon of rhetoric? Elocutio, where you choose the style in which you have to show and to communicate your speech. So accounting, this is the finding of that paper published in the US, is intrinsically a rhetorical practice. Okay? There is an historical link between accounting and rhetoric. And accounting, rhetoric, and the art of memory. These things were all figures, visualizations that were used in the art of memory to remember things, but also to invent things. Art of memory in medieval times was not about remembering things. It was also about inventing things on the spot. You ask me a question and I can answer to you because I reorder and dispose my cards in a way that invents a new meaning for love. Okay? So there is this relationship between accounting and rhetoric. Now, this was invented by a guy called Orazio Toscanella in 1580 something. Now, what is the Balanced Scorecard if not a rhetorical machine? You have something at the middle, in the middle, which is strategic vision, whatever, the strategic imperatives, and then you set around it 4 cards, which define what this vision and strategy could be. Without this displacement of card, what is at the center doesn't have any meaning. I remember once I talked I was interviewing the Chancellor of the University of Oxford for a research on university management, and at one point he interrupted me and said, "Paolo, why, you don't like efficiency?" And I said, "Well, it depends." And he said, "Exactly, it depends. If by efficiency they mean that we have to cut the tutorial system, this is not the efficiency that I like." So efficiency, integration, globalization, strategic leadership, they are empty signifiers up to the point that you start making them real by putting things around them, by operationalize them in some way that make them concrete. So the Balanced Scorecard resembles the idea of rhetorical will quite well, and that thing was invented by Orazio Toscanelli in 1560. Every time I talk about this, I always say something about a conference where I was at. I was one of the 3 keynote speakers. One was me, one was Bob Skavens, and the other one was Bob Kaplan. And I always say the difference between me and Bob Kaplan was 47,000 euros. So it makes you reflect how you can actually raise a lot of interest with this. I remember some Spanish colleagues who said, Paolo, you know what you did today? You acted as a telonero. What is a telonero?
It's when you have in a concert, you have the big names.
You have the big name, and then you have the small name who warms up the audience. I was the small name warming up the audience for the big star to come on stage. But there was a huge difference between me and them. So rhetorical machines take different forms. The interesting thing about rhetorical machines is that most of the visualizations that are used nowadays in management, like wheels, hierarchies, columns, cells, they were all invented around that time for rhetorical purposes. And when I say rhetorical purposes, I don't want to use the word rhetoric in a pejorative sense. Rhetoric at that time was a way of organizing and inventing new knowledge. It was not something that related only to persuasion. It did also relate to persuasion, but it was the way in which knowledge was organized. So rhetoric, logic, grammar, these were parts of the trivium, and this was what intellectuals had as tools to order and define knowledge. So when I talk about rhetoric, I don't want to use the term in a pejorative sense. But there were tons of these visualizations, and they could also be spaces. The most interesting space is possibly the church. I was looking at various books on rhetoric and art of memory when I was revising that paper in iOS, and I came across this picture in a book by Mary Carruthers, who is a professor of literature at New York University, but also now at Oxford. And this is a plan of a medieval church where you can see a path, okay? And how does this space work as a rhetorical machine? In what sense? So you enter the church and you do certain things in the first chapel, then you do certain other things in the second chapel. So in the first chapel you may actually look at a painting. In the second chapel you may touch the relic of the saint. Then you may go to the center of the nave and you look at the frescoes. If it happens to you, then you go to the Church of the Gesù, la Chiesa del Gesù in Rome. Go there and stay below the dome of the church, and you will be staying in this way, in a quite uncomfortable way, and you will look at the frescoes, and the frescoes will actually make you feel that you are taken up to God. So these things were machines which created and prompted some formational meaning. Now, if you go now to the Church of Gesù in Rome, a stupid architect actually put a mirror on the floor. So now you can look at the fresco like this, so the machine doesn't work anymore. So it was invented to make you faint, almost, by linking visual with body, okay, to make you imagine something. Now, in a modern fashion, just look at this, oh, they're nice, but they don't do anything to you. While before, they did a lot, okay? So, you go to the first chapel, then you go to the center of the nave, then you confess your sins, then you do everything, and at the end you get an illumination, you get a vision of God, you get real knowledge, okay? How was this illumination called in medieval, in early modern Italian? No? It was called theoria. So an illumination was called a theory. So once you get this vision of truth, you get a theory. And that made me think that this is nothing more than a PhD in accounting and finance. You take the first course in microeconomics, possibly, then you take finance 1, then you take finance 2, then you go back home, you have a nightmare, you think that men are not rational, oh my god. Then you go to your supervisor, you confess your sin, and your supervisor tells you, go back and reread Berlin Means, men are rational, okay? And then at the end of this, you have your illumination, and you believe in Black and Scholes and all of these things. So, this path is actually called a ductus, and a ductus is normally organized in rhetorical terms. It's normally organized in 3 parts. The first part, you do an inventory of your sin, an inventory of yourself. You write down your sins. The second part, you organize the various options that you have. You may follow God or evil, so you have a language of interrogation. You interrogate yourself about what you want to do. By the way, in the spiritual exercises, these 2 images that you have to create in your mind to make a choice were called standards. The standard of God and the standard of evil, like in accounting standards. So the origin of the word standard comes from a religious idea. So it's a banner, it's something that you have to follow. And then in the third stage, you have this illumination. So everything is organized in this way. In accounting, this works pretty well. You do the inventory, then you start to organize things to make decisions, and then at the end, you have the profit and loss account. So the ductus works also in that. So what these machines did was to create notions of truth, not because you read the truth in a text. For instance, at Oxford, they don't say I study economics and management. They say I read economics and management. I read physics. I read theology. Why? Because the idea was that you go to the library in medieval times. The truth is in that manuscript which is kept in the Bodleian, and you read the truth. The truth is in the book. Here, there is another way of getting to this truth, which is called orthopraxis. So the truth is not in the text, but it is in the practice that actually you do. And every time you follow this path, you reinvent the notion of God. So you reinvent the notion of truth. So, for instance, in the spiritual exercises of the Jesuits, there is no one single word that defines what God is. But there are tons of methods and rules about things that you have to do when you meditate. So you have to put the light down, you have to light a candle, you have to sit in a corner, you may have to, flagellate yourself. I mean, a series of things. But there is no one single word that tells you what God is. The content is not defined. The content is always found in the liturgy. The content is always found in the process. So that is the meaning of orthopraxis. And these machines, they always relied on visualizations to foster imagination and creativity. So they are visual performable space. What it means that they are visual performable space. They are spaces that have to be performed. It's not that you stay there, look at the mirror on the bottom and you get knowledge. No, you actually have to do things. Because otherwise the machine doesn't work. So you have to do something with it. The machine makes you do stuff. And by making you do stuff, you start the process of meaning construction. They offer procedures as the exercises of the Jesuits. So there are methods of ordering, but also of innovation, because when you order things, you can reorder them, and with the same things, you create new meanings. Every time you do the exercises, you find a different kind of God. They allow continuous questioning of visions and beliefs. So they are a means of interrogation and mediation. You could be a sinner in Rome, but not in Beijing. So you keep questioning, am I doing well? Yes or no? Okay, so for instance, in the, I cannot write anywhere here, but in the spiritual exercise, you have to put down your sins, but it's you who define whether you are a sinner or not. So the definition of sin depends on the context in which you are. So it could be bribery, it could be bad in London, but it could be perfectly acceptable in Palermo. Actually, it is perfectly acceptable. Okay? So it depends. So these sins are not written in stone. Okay? They call for a performance and allow appropriation. So they are motivating rituals. So they force you to do certain things, and by doing certain things, they engage you. You become part of the process. You become part of the furniture, which reminds me my experience at Christchurch when I joined the college. For the first 3 years, I didn't understand their rituals at all. I thought they were crazy, talking about the color of the carpet for 3 hours. Why? Why these intelligent people waste time in this way? After a while, I started to be part of the ritual. I started to like it, and then at the end, I enjoyed talking in 3 hours about the color of the carpet of the senior common room, because that was a way for me to understand who I was talking to. Okay, so there are tons of things that they did which would appear strange to a normal person, but they're perfectly normal for them. Okay, so now let's go to the paper. The paper tries to put all these things together to explain the balanced scorecard, why it is so successful, why it engages so much, why Kaplan is paid so much when he gives a speech. Not only because he's a wonderful speaker, but also because the thing itself does something to us and to practitioners. So we have tons of different studies, and this is just one on the Balanced Scorecard implementation in Magog, which is a very large oil company in the Middle East, quite easy to spot actually. I'll skip this because I think it's not of interest. So what is the case about? It was 2002 when the government wanted to do something with that huge company that they owned. The company is so big that most of the country's GDP is actually generated by that company. So managing that company means managing the country, really, or managing the production and distribution of wealth in that country. So there were two different interests there. Revenue growth, so a commercial interest, and then development of the local community, of the national community, so a national interest. And a way of mixing these two things, or linking these two things, was the Balanced Scorecard. So they thought that the Balanced Scorecard could have helped them to achieve these strategic imperatives. What were the corporate strategic imperatives? Transforming the corporate performance, optimizing the corporate portfolio, capturing oil market opportunities, blah, blah, blah. As I said before, these things do not mean anything unless they are defined by certain other things. So transforming corporate performance, it doesn't mean anything unless you define how you want to transform it, how you define performance, and what it means corporate. So these things are empty labels, they are empty signifiers. The same thing goes for integration, for instance. I remember a case, I was interviewing people for the paper on the ERP implementation, and they were all keen about having the company integrated. Oh, we like integration, we love integration. Then implementation of the ERP system, oh, someone is accessing my books. Well, that's integration. Oh, this is not the integration that I thought, you know? So integration may mean, and means very many different things to different people, but also it means different things depending on how it is made practical. Also, one point of the paper, I think, is, or possibly the key point now in the current version of the paper, is that the Balanced Scorecard does not represent these things. So the Balanced Scorecard, although it's a performance measurement system, doesn't work because it represents corporate performance. Doesn't work because it represents corporate portfolio. Because these things are absent. They become present in the moment in which you link them to KPIs and to other things. Otherwise, they are empty. Okay? So if this is what representations do, I mean, representations, the word itself says that it's impossible to represent things, because if you analyze the etymology of the word, it is made of two parts. One is presentation and one is which means that you make things present again. You make things which are abstract present again through the process of referencing to them. Accounting is a system through which you reference to things which are intrinsically abstract and absent. You make them present by the process of doing it, okay? And this is no exception for the Balanced Scorecard. So what makes the Balanced Scorecard a successful control practice? We have the four features of our theoretical framework here. It is a visual performable space in the first instance. So, especially in the late few years, when you look at the implementation of the Balanced Scorecard, you always find the Balanced Scorecard with this visual shape. You have something in the middle and four cards around it. But the corporate strategic imperatives are always different. The perspectives may be the same, but may actually be different. The KPIs are always different. So the only thing that remains constant in the various Balanced Scorecard that you see implemented in different organizations is the visual shape of the Balanced Scorecard. All the rest changes all the time. It changes because of whatever you want, of external variables, egos, whatever. But the only thing that you keep constant in looking at the Balanced Scorecard in different organizations is the visual shape. One round circle with four boxes around it. And these things, as I said before, they are not representation. They do much more than representation. What they do is actually to make things present again, or to invent new solutions, new things. And here we have another example, the strategy map that is linked with the Balanced Scorecard, where you have the strategic imperatives there and the various perspective, financial, customer, internal, learning, growth on this side. Kaplan doesn't tell you how to link these things. It just offers you a way of building this relationship, of building the imperative with the financial. So this space is actually empty, and it is a space that needs to be performed. It needs to be appropriated. It needs to be used by the users. It is the thing in itself doesn't tell you anything unless you practice it, unless you do something with it. In itself, it's empty. It's like exactly like the church. If you go to a church and you do not know exactly what to do, you may see a nice painting, but the church doesn't do anything to you. It's only if you are trained also in a certain way that it does things to you. So here also training is an important part of the story, although we do not do anything about this in this So the key point that we want to make in the paper is therefore that the Balanced Scorecard is successful and engages people, not because it represents, because it cannot represent. Every representation is epistemologically impossible to be made. So it does something else. What it does is that it generates organizational action. So it engages users and it makes people do things that otherwise they would not be doing. This is why the Balanced Scorecard becomes powerful. So a visual performable space, something that it is there empty for the users to fill in. And this is what one of the managers, actually this was the CEO of the company, I think, or a member of the implementation team in one of the division. And now it's up to you. We put this slide on PowerPoint, and he said, and now it's up to you and your department leaders to find the proper objectives and measures to make sure that you can orient yourself on the MEDOC strategy map and show how you can add value along this longitude and latitude. How to link financial with performance could be done in many different ways. How to link learning and growth to promote national economy can be done in many different ways. It's up to you to discuss how you want to do it. Okay? So it makes people engaged in this process in this conversation about how to establish links. So the second thing that we found is this idea of being a method of ordering and innovation. And here you have exactly the, let's say, explanation of what I was saying before. How you create value in that organization can be done in many different things. what the Balanced Scorecard does is to provide you some order in order to innovate how the value can be created. So here, for instance, you have, like in any map, horizontally they are organized for the four Balanced Scorecard perspectives. Vertically, you have the strategic imperatives, and like any good map, it has got coordinates and longitude for both longitude and latitude. When you have a map in front of you, the map doesn't tell you where to go and how to go there. It gives you options. Do you want to go through the motorway? Do you want to go through a nice countryside road? You may go in many different ways. Same thing here. The Balanced Scorecard doesn't tell you exactly what to do. It offers you possibilities for you to colonize them. And here there is another example that actually comes from one of those books that I mentioned before. This is a way of keeping an inventory in a Benedictine monastery. And so the accountant, Pietra, said, look, what you have to do if you want to keep an inventory of your stuff is to put here the things that you want to inventorize, and put here the people who are responsible to it. And then you number the, here, for instance, is a basket of nuts, okay? So how many basket of nuts this person has? 4, okay? So you do an inventory. But he warns the reader of the book at the end. He says, look, but be careful. I'm giving you a method. I'm not telling that on this line you have to write basket of nuts and blah, blah, blah. Because what you want to inventorize, it's up to you. I'm just giving you a method of ordering things, okay? And this is what happens with inventories, that they make things inventorized, but of course, once you change the coordinates there, you invent new forms of inventorize. And here, this is another interesting rhetorical machine, the grid. The grid was invented to transform qualities into quantities. And this is what the Balanced Scorecard does. Transforms qualities into quantities. Abstract things like, increase corporate performance or good corporate performance, equality, into a quantity, a KPI. Again, a rhetorical figure, a rhetorical visual artifact, which was called a grid, like this one. And also as a method of ordering and innovation, of course, once you use these rhetorical machines, you can do all sorts of magics. And this is what in one of the divisions of the company they did. They said, look, if you want us to use the Balanced Scorecard, we actually want to add 2 other perspectives there, because otherwise we cannot do what we want to do. Fine, add them as far as they are coherent with the rest. And so you are changing the notion of corporate strategic imperatives there by adding 2 different dimensions, but keeping the entire things unite. Do we share the same idea of corporate strategic imperative? No, because I'm doing certain things that you are not doing. So we do not share those meaning of strategic imperative, because we are doing different things with it. But still, we make the Balanced Scorecard alive and kicking because we keep using it. So the Balanced Scorecard and the visualizations that now are so common to us, so we use these things without knowing what they do to us. They were invented not as forms of representation. They were invented as forms of ordering and invention. And they still do this, although we believe that they just represent. The account was invented as a form of mediating amongst different balances, or different interests. So it was a way of balancing different interests, not representing true and fair views. The Ludovico Flori, the Jesuit accountant, inventor of the accruals, said in the preface of his book, look, accounting is a pragmatic science, which means that it solves problems. I, as an accountant, solve problems, like the guy in Pulp Fiction. I come there, I solve problems. Nothing to do with truth, because he said truth is something that theologians deal about, or deal with. I'm a simple accountant. I solve problems. So these things are there to solve problems, not to actually make sure that we have the right information to make the right decision. We use these things to balance different interests and make not a rational decision, but a reasonable decision, which is different. Here, means of interrogation, I'll skip that because I do want to leave some time for discussion. Of course, there are, as in the spatial exercises, you do the inventory, then you set all the options, and then you interrogate what you want to do, how to link things, what kind of person you want to be. Same thing here. In the Balanced Scorecard, what it does is to allow a process of questioning and interrogation about what these corporate strategic imperatives are, because no one knows. And therefore, the discovery of what they are and what they become is in the process, is in the orthopractice, is not because it is written in Kaplan's book. If it were written in Kaplan's book, I would say, I agree, I disagree. Instead, in this way, I say, I don't know, it may work. And so I start using it. And so it's because these things are quite opaque and leave things quite open that they engage, not because they provide a very clear idea of what they want to do. And here is the example of a business cafe. Here, this picture is, so they put all the managers who were in charge of the implementation of the Balanced Scorecard in a big hangar with air conditioning, of course. And they started questioning what these corporate strategic imperatives meant to them, and start to build the Balanced Scorecard from the scratch. The last thing is that these things are motivating ritual. Here I would need to because I think that otherwise the engagement thing doesn't work. How can I write somewhere? GB, you are the. Let's do this.
You can turn off one of the screens.
Yes.
Turn off the left-hand screen. if you want
That's
to.
the right on one of the whiteboards.
Here. Okay, I'll try to write it here.
Or you can
I'll get rid of the.
get rid of one
Close-
screen.
close the
Can I get rid of one?
Look,
Yeah,
look
but
at
press-
in front
press
of
on
you.
the projector, no, on
project
the-
on the screen.
On the screen there, touch the screen in front of you,
This screen.
and then it says close one.
Don't close the-
Just close
Uh,
one.
Close the top.
so off one, yeah. Yes.
There you go.
Okay, good. So, in what sense they are motivating rituals? Here I do need some effort, some help from the spiritual exercise of the Jesuits. As I said, first thing that you do when you want to discover knowledge, you do an inventory. Same thing in the spiritual exercises. When you want to discover who you are, you do an inventory. You do an inventory of yourself. How do you do it? So you write 7 G's. Italians, what does G stand for? 7 G's. 7. Come on, bit of imagination. Are they 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The 7.
The 7? 7 days. Okay, in a week there are 7 days. So what do you have to do when you practice the exercises? You have to do an examination of yourself. In the morning when you woke up, okay? Actually no, after lunch. And depending on how many scenes you have done, you put a dot here. Okay, and you write the scene here. Then you do the same thing at night, after supper. Okay, normally at night. Many more scenes. Then you repeat this for every day of the first week of the exercises.
Can't
And
you
this-
go back
Huh?
instead of adding less seats if you do something?
Oh yeah, of course, you can do whatever. I was just trying to break a joke saying that at night, you know, it's easier to make scenes. But no one seemed to realize that I'm the only singer in the room. Then you do this on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then by the end of the week, the space in between the two lines is much smaller, which means that you are supposed to improve during the week. There is not enough space to write scenes there. That is, as I said, the inventory. Okay. Then you have a language of choice. You have to choose between the two standards, and then you have the illumination. Okay. Bingo. So that is the idea. That is a kind of ritual where you start being a sinner, and then you find God at the end. That is what we do all the time. We do it with accounting. We start keeping the accounts, then we do certain things with the hope that, you know, at the end of the year we are improving. Okay? So it all comes from this idea of ductus, it was called at that time. And here you have this, the same thing. You have a kind of ritual, a kind of ductus that you have to go through that also helps to motivate yourself to use the Balanced Scorecard, but also to reinvent the Balanced Scorecard. So you have the annual Balanced Scorecard measures awareness training sessions. Then you repeat certain things on a monthly basis. So you have the monthly Balanced Scorecard team review sessions. Then you have the quarterly Balanced Scorecard budget integrated review sessions. Then you can even do on your own in your room, you know, at night before going to bed, the individual Balanced Scorecard measure builder sessions on SAP. So on SAP, you can play with the KPIs. So SAP allows you to make the Balanced Scorecard yours, because there are certain measures that I do not like, and let's see whether I can find my own measures. Okay, and so I'm engaged by the practice. I don't like that Balanced Scorecard, but I can still do mine. You know? And then business cafes, blah blah blah. This is like the church, and at the end you get this illumination. You get this idea of having improved, or, and this is why this is the motivating ritual, or at least you get the belief that by doing these things you can improve. Maybe you will not improve because there is no such a definition of good or bad, but you are still engaged by the practice that tells you that you can improve. And so you start by being a sinner and you end up being God. Okay? You know, the cafes were ways of enacting the ritual. An interesting thing that they did was also this matrix there, where they split up the process of improvement. So you create a linkage chart that links your work to the company, and then you can have certain points, and you can see, exactly like in these spiritual exercises, how many points you have, and whether you are a good Balanced Scorecard user or you are a bad Balanced Scorecard user. Okay? So it's the same process of verifying yourself, or verifying how you are behaving, whether you are a good Jesuit or a good Balanced Scorecard user. So what we want to say in this paper is that the Balanced Scorecard is not a performance measurement system. It doesn't measure because it cannot measure. But what it does, it performs measures. So it makes measures being performable. So the Balanced Scorecard is performing measurement systems. And it's performing measurement systems not in a way that forces people to do the same thing, but it performs measure in a way that opens up the possibility of doing many different things while people still believe that they are doing the same one. This is why these products become so successful. If one product would be doing one very specific thing, and that thing would be very clear, I may say, I don't like it, I don't need it. It's exactly because these managerial solutions, and this doesn't apply to the Balanced Scorecard only, but it applies on all the successful management consulting products. What they do is actually to engage the user and make the user do whatever he or she wants with the practice. The practice in itself is quite empty. What it does, though, is to present or to have, I'll skip these four features. So it's always something that forces the user to do something with it, okay? It's always something that allows you to order a reality that is always quite chaotic. But in doing this, you also invent new ways of defining this reality, but also linking the various things that you have identified. It's a means of interrogation and mediation, so you interrogate yourself, you interrogate the others, and you start to mediate amongst the various things. In a sense, we had an experiment this afternoon. We questioned each other on what you want to do with this, and then we mediated. Okay? And then it's a motivating ritual, because by doing these things, you are led to the idea that you can improve, and that you can eventually get to somewhere where this somewhere is always in the process of definition, therefore there is no way defined where we can go. Okay? I think I'll stop here because possibly